Eric, man, thanks for jumping on. Excited to have you on the show. Jealous that you're in Florida right now. But just to start off with, who are you? What do you do? And where are you from?
Hey guys, I really appreciate you guys both having me on the show. Just really want to start off there myself. A little bit about me though. Eric Schultz, Journey Alliance. I'm one of the partners at Journey, and it's a mix between business coaching and consulting. We like to say we're 90% coaching, 10% consulting. But really at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is help small business owners and their team be able to grow and develop their businesses. Originally from the Tampa Bay area for most of my life, I'm here visiting and actually call Chattanooga, Tennessee home these days. I'm frankly looking forward to getting back to Chattanooga and being in the great outdoors there.
So Eric, tell us a little bit about how you grew up and kind of how did you get into where you're at today? I'm interested to know more about Journey Alliance, but tell us a little bit about how you got into the construction industry and kind of what that path was like.
Yeah, I'll give you first, I'll give you maybe about 3 or so years ago, and then I'll step back and go forward. I had sold a business a little bit over 3 years ago, and primarily a landscape maintenance, landscape installation, some other services, but a field service business. And when I sold it, I had already been on a path to continue moving towards what I'm doing now. And frankly, I'd been part of what I've been doing for a while, but I had taken a bit of a detour. And I was sitting with a peer advisory group and was really wrestling with the direction that I wanted to go. Did I want to grow a business that was beyond just me from a coaching and consulting standpoint, or was I just going to leave it with me and provide the best service possible myself? So I was really wrestling with whether to grow a business or not. And one of the individuals in the peer advisory group, he basically looked at me, and this isn't what he said, but what I heard him say is it's really not that complex, you idiot. And of course, that's not what he said to me, but he said it's not that complex. He said the more people that you can actually work with, the more people you can help. And the simplicity of that was the impetus for me to say, okay, I really do want to put my time and energy into growing a business that goes beyond me, because if I do it well and I do it with excellence with other team members, then we can help more people as they continue to grow their businesses. Now, I bring that up because the company that bought my business, they had a construction component, and they do have a construction component to it. And I'd only been lightly exposed to construction prior to that, admittedly. I was very interested in that part of their business. It wasn't the part that I was working on the heaviest, but the reality that I was going to continue to grow and develop a business beyond just one customer at a time led to Mark and I, my business partner, and I saying to ourselves, okay, if we're going to focus our time and energy and really double down in a particular area, where do we want to double down? And so that really caused us to want to put our primary focus in the construction, field service, and trade area. And it wasn't just specifically because of the industry and the interest in the industry, it was because of the need. Every business is made up of people, and what we do is really all about people. It can transfer from industry to industry, but the reality is there are so many great people that have ended up in the construction and the trade fields that maybe have that technical skill set, and business owners that have done an amazing job growing their business. But the area that we really focus on is such a gap. And we saw the need and we saw the opportunity to support business owners and their teams in the construction and the trade side. I'm stepping back though, tried the college thing. Admittedly, the time that I tried it really wasn't for me, didn't work out well, couldn't sit still. And so I ended up at that point in the landscape field service industry by default early on. But what I realized is I love being able to see what I produced. I love being able to see the results. And then as that carried on, I realized I loved being able to be part of developing teams. Started at the crew level, then beyond that, then to helping grow a small business at the time that went from about 20 employees to 65 employees. And then had some other opportunities along the way to grow my own businesses as well. So that's a little bit of the journey of where it started for me. But I gave you the end point just to say the construction field service side. I don't necessarily have construction in my blood. It just became part of what we did because we realized where we could really support business owners and their teams.
Yeah.
Well, I
You
mean,
know, this is
that's the beautiful part about an industry, though, right? You don't have to have this allotted experience to get in. That's the cool part, which I like that you're admitting that and talking about it. That's cool.
Yeah, it gives me such a great appreciation though for what I don't know. And so, when I get into certain areas, we're not the construction experts. We don't claim to be that in terms of the technical side of the industry. And so when we get into pockets where we're doing what we do to support a team, I have such an appreciation for things that individuals like yourselves and those that are truly just been and in and out of the construction industry, which you all know is so amazing. And it gives me a great appreciation for it.
What's really cool about your perspective here is that, right, we kind of have an opportunity to talk about what is an employer thinking, right, when they have, or in the construction industry or service-based industry, because the podcast itself is about equipping the next generation of builders,
Yeah.
right? And the majority of them are coming into this industry and getting a job. But most of them, one, have maybe never worked in construction before, or two, have never had a full-time job. And so they don't know what an employer is actually thinking of when they
Yeah.
are running a company, or when they're hiring an employee, or when they're trying to grow a business, right? Most people who work for companies are just kind of sitting there, go to work every day. They go
Yeah.
and put in the 9 to 5 or 7 to 5 or whatever the time is, and they don't think more about it, right? But this is a backseat pass into what's actually going on in this company that they're working for. And they see it grow, and they see all these different strategic moves. But what goes into that, right? So from your perspective, one, when you are looking at new hires coming in, when you're looking at hiring someone from outside in leadership position, or you name it, what are the major things that you're looking for in that specific individual and
Yeah.
would value higher above maybe some other things?
Yeah, great question. Let me give you just a slice. So the companies we work with tend to have anywhere from 10 to, I think we're pushing 250, 300 with one of our clients. And the larger client is a mix between trade and general contractor as well. So that's the company size. We're not talking, larger, national businesses. Some of them have a footprint multi-state on the general contracting side, but not some of the larger ones. So yeah, in terms of areas that I get to see and have the opportunity to be part of, we do support recruiting efforts with some of our clients. So we literally see from the time that a role is even thought up, if it doesn't exist, we actually help them run that process to create the role that doesn't exist.
That's cool.
And then once that role, yeah, it's a lot of fun because people roll their eyes and they're well, we have job descriptions. We can just use job descriptions. But when you get a group of people in the room that are related to that role, which is our process, and you actually hash out through the process what the job is really calling for, it's funny how many differences of opinions people have. And so we run a process to actually firm up what the role involves. And then from there we support the recruiting efforts. All I have to say is we do get to see that process, especially if we're actually running the recruiting for our clients. So we don't claim to be recruiters. We act on the interest or best interest of our clients, but we act in the recruiting role. So what are they looking for when we're running through that process? Generally, so if we're running through things, we use key accountabilities. And so we're looking at what are the 4 or 5 things that this role calls for? And does this person have the experience to be able to execute on these 4 or 5 things? But let me give you an example. And I've seen this multiple times recently in the smaller businesses. If it's a ground up or vertical construction company in the space that we're in, so it might be multifamily, might be some type of warehouse type building. We're not talking about anything that's overly complex. Beyond that, they may be, if it's a project management role, they may not be looking for someone that necessarily has the experience in a similar industry. They might be willing to take someone to transfer over from, say, electric or from plumbing, but from MEP that has the project management experience to transfer over into their industry. So all that to say is just because someone doesn't have the exact experience that the role is calling for doesn't mean that someone shouldn't apply or be open to a conversation if a recruiter reaches out, because they might be willing to take that transfer and skill set
Yeah.
from one area to another. And that's the one thing I would say. Skill set wise, depending on the role, if you're looking at leadership, a history of actually being able to lead, the best way to see a history of being able to lead are the people that have reported to you previously. And that's, so if you're looking for not a first time leadership role, let's step back there for a second. But if you're looking for something that, maybe you're going the next step from a leadership standpoint, then I would personally want to be able to talk to some people that would know that you had an impact on them and what they've been doing,
Yeah.
because that's the sign of a great leader. And a great leader, you can be, getting your feet wet a few years from a career standpoint and still have that person that you help bring along. And that is a good indication that you've had some leadership ability through that process. Just thinking that through though, references, we I do check them. Not everybody does. I don't, it's interesting though, when I check references, I'm more asking the question because once I get to that point, like we're pretty close to saying that we'd want to hire you. I'm more asking the question of if so and so comes on board, what can we do to support their onboarding? And hopefully people kind of let the guard down a little bit because nobody's perfect. So we're also asking, what are the areas that they might get hung up a little bit? So it is kind of that strengths and weaknesses. But all to say is, if someone gives references and every single reference does the same thing, great that it's all glowing reviews, but it's also hard to really get a feel for a person if they're not willing to have a real conversation with you.
That's pretty cool. Eric, I used to struggle at interviewing. I was just mortified, and Walker's laughing now because this is what we do, right?
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
interviewing people. But I used to just be so timid and scared, and there's a lot of things, reasons why, and I'm not going to get into that whole backstory, but my aunt and her business partner helped me learn how to get better at interviewing. And one of the things that he encouraged me to do was most people always, in an interview setting, they ask you what's a strength, what's a weakness, and everyone always tries to play the weakness to a strength. But I was taught, he's like, just be honest. They want to see if you're going to be honest and vulnerable. And I remember getting asked that question for my employer now, Brasford and Gorey. They said, what are some of your weaknesses? I was like, really, I have a tendency to overthink and I get a little too detailed. That may not sound like a weakness, but I might get locked in on something and I shouldn't be for way too long. And they're like, hey, I appreciate you admitting that. So talk about that process, because I know, again, for me, it was not just that, but just interviewing in general, since you get to be helping your client and what are they looking for. Talk about that process for the next generation.
Yeah, so I fully expect with video interviews that your technology is going to go wrong. So like it's just going to happen. It can have worked perfectly for you all day long, but as soon as you try to get into a video-based interview, if someone's interviewing, so I say on the other side of that, normally what I'm doing with an owner, or if it's a leadership team member that's hiring or manager that's hiring, I actually prep them. I say, hey, we don't, nobody loses points for technology issues. So even if they've got to wrestle with it for 10 minutes because things are broken and they're not going wrong, like there's a human on the other side. They're freaking out right now. Like the fact that they are freaking out. So yeah. So I always and I try to calm people down when they come in at that point, because your heart's beating. You're like, man, I just blew this whole entire thing. If someone is not going to hire you, unless you're interviewing for a role that was like the whole role, right? Then you're not getting hired. That's your fault. But other than that, like if a company is going to truly hold that against you, it's probably not the right company anyways. That's my opinion. So that I would kind of have some calm nerves on that end. The other thing is I don't care if people don't interview well. And so I'll give you an example. Anybody that's gone through an interview with me will recognize this. And then they're going to say, wow, he says that to everyone. I thought I was special. But no. So, but when someone starts the interview, I use situation-based question when I interview. So there's a whole assessment-based process, but I use the tell me about a time when you, or give me an example when you. But what I also tell people is how quickly you answer the question doesn't matter. And what's going to feel like 5 minutes for you is probably really 5 seconds.
Right.
So, and granted, I'm not saying that everybody that interviews has the same approach that I do, but my thing is this, is not everybody is quick to process and respond. That doesn't make them any less intelligent or capable. Good. It's just different ways of thinking and different styles. And so I would rather, and I normally intro that way, I would rather tell somebody, hey, take your time. So if the interviewer or recruiter or hiring manager doesn't have the same way that I approach it, it'd be completely appropriate to say, do you mind if I take a few seconds to think that one through? That's a really good question. We're all used to that. Hey, that's a great question. Pause. I might even do it during this conversation. But to be able to just say, that's a great question. Can you give me a few seconds? People aren't going to say no, answer faster. And if they do, again, wrong company.
Not the right company.
Yeah. But yeah, I'd say just being thoughtful about those questions through the interview process. But for me, I'm looking for, to your point, Davis, you hit it on the head. I'm looking for reality. And so I'll also tell people when I prep them kind of jumping into that interview with the hiring manager, I'll say, we're looking for your real responses. The only people that don't interview well with us are the people that try to give us the answers that we want to hear, because we all hear it and we all know that what you're saying is what you think we want to hear.
Right.
I'll just tell people that straight up. So I just tell people, just let your guard down, be real. And then also tell them the questions I'm going to ask. There's literally no Like it's not a yes or no, right or wrong question that I'm asking. There's only one question that I ask that has a clear wrong answer, and it has to do with personal accountability. And I ask people the question, tell me about a time when you made a mistake.
Hmm.
And that's one of the primary questions I'll ask, because most roles, personal accountability is a pretty big deal. I've literally had one person out of everybody I've interviewed, and I've interviewed quite a few people, that actually paused for a second and said, no, I can't remember the last time I made a mistake. And
Oh my
I thought
gosh.
to myself, I'm like, this interview's over. Like, I
Yeah.
don't even want to take the rest of the time to interview. I feel for this
Yeah.
person, but at the end of the day, like, how many mistakes? Can you only tell me about the one I made today or yesterday?
Right.
Like, which mistakes should we talk about? Like, how complex of a mistake do we want to talk about? But yeah, just answer honestly, Davis. I think what you brought up was really great.
I love that, Eric, because, for me, that's another reason. Another thing that they taught me was I was not, I'm not a big processor. Like when I can't respond quick. As you can see,
Yeah.
I was struggling to get it
Yep.
out there. Like it takes me
Yep.
time to think, and so whenever I'm processing, great question, and then pause. And again, I love what you mentioned earlier, because what you think is 5 minutes is 5 seconds, and silence is key.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
silence
Yeah.
just makes people uncomfortable, right? And
Yeah.
my aunt taught me that too. Like it could be a very powerful negotiation skill, but also can just show that, hey, you're comfortable with that silence, right? And so
Yeah.
going in back into the interview side, this is one of the things that Walker and I wrote about. We talked about establishing your own values so that whenever you're looking at these companies,
Mhm.
for, for some people, at least at our level, when we got hired, I had 3, 4, 5 interviews, right? They wanted to see that I was the right fit. And if
Yep.
I didn't align with the company based off my own values, then I wouldn't go pick that company. But a lot of people don't have their own values. A lot of people don't take their own time to
Yep.
think, am I going to fit with this company? They just are thinking, okay, unfortunately, I'm not prepared financially, so I got to find the next job, right? I just got to
Yep.
find the next one and the next one. And so maybe talk about that. I think it's a huge disservice to the people in our industry that are just going job to job to job to job because they can't take the time to really understand, is this company someone I want to be with for the long term? Is it someone I believe that's going to train me? Do I believe that they actually value me as a person? And if you don't, if you're a person like Walker and I in our first job, if you don't feel any of those things and you can't get those questions answered, I would say keep interviewing, right?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I think being true to what your values are is extremely important. The other thing is that calms the nerves for most people, because they're not as worried about getting that job as they are finding a match for themselves.
Yeah.
So, from that perspective, have their own questions, and they handle it in a way that I feel is appropriate. So I normally intro in the beginning of an interview and say, hey, I'm going to spend the first 20, 30 minutes asking questions. Then so and so, they're going to pick up, they're going to ask you some more technical questions, a little bit more specific to the job
Mhm.
itself. But we're
Yeah.
going to leave 10 minutes at the end for questions for you. Are you okay with that? And sometimes, we'll do questions in the beginning, just depends on the role and how we handle it. But always leaving space for those questions. People that come prepared with those questions, it shows.
Yeah.
And to your point, you can also, based off those responses, you can figure out what the company is really about pretty quickly.
Mm.
Some of the people, I mean, it's a little different now, but it's still relevant. But and people that were coming asking, how did you all handle COVID response, and what did your company do, and how did you bounce back, or anything like that. And it's not, I'm not getting into all the dynamics around that, but really the people that were asking that were really, in my opinion, well prepared to find out, is this company
Mm.
resilient?
Yeah.
Mm.
Do they make good leadership decisions? Is it even
Yeah.
something they want to talk about? Because if they don't even want to talk about it, then
Red
were
flag.
they able to navigate it? Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, having some good questions. I think there's a line though. You want to be sensitive to those questions, because you got to think about the hiring manager. You want to get what you are hoping to learn from the business. You want to show up as a professional that did some research. But if you cross that line, you're basically putting that hiring manager in the hot seat beyond what might be comfortable.
Hmm.
And humans are emotional beings. They may not leave with a good memory of the interview if all of a sudden they feel like they're being attacked. So you got to kind of figure out where that line is of figuring out, is it a match for your values, asking intelligent questions, and potentially crossing a line and asking questions that might be a little bit too deep for that initial interview. Now, if you go deeper, 4 or 5 interviews, I think you can start digging in deeper and deeper each interview.
No, that's really good. And I think You can't even talk now either. You really you covered a lot of points very well, right? I want to ask one more regarding hiring, and then we can move on for it. But for someone
Yeah.
specifically who just graduated, like you kind of you mentioned it, and you brought a lot of points. But for someone who just graduated and they're like brand new, right? No
Yep.
experience at all,
Oh yeah.
never had a job before. You don't have any leadership experience. You have barely any qualities from working that you can
Yeah.
pass forward or talk about. What are the top 3 things that an employer would be looking for a college grad fresh out of school, or even a high school student who's just going straight into maybe into the trades or into some sort of
Yeah.
job they didn't even go to college?
Yeah. Let me tell you the top disqualifier, and then
Ooh,
I'll
I like
use
this.
that time of talking to process your other 3 questions, admittedly, or the other 3 responses. So top disqualifier, and let me say this to start. I want people to make in any situation as much money as possible. Top disqualifier though is someone that starts out with unreasonable salary expectations. And
Mm,
I see it. I mean, part of the recruiting is I do look for recent construction management grads for certain roles, and it's a really tough space for me because there's really smart people that have a really great career path ahead of themselves. And if they're able to secure the salary they're looking for and they're playing the long game and they're being patient and that's really what's important for them, then
yeah.
they should stay on that path. And there's nothing wrong with that. What I would say though is if they've accepted the interview, they understand the company that they're interviewing with, they understand the role they're interviewing for, they should have some understanding of how far outside of the salary they are. Company or Glassdoor, pay scale. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to get a feel for what those salary ranges might be,
Mm-hmm.
and having a feel for the market. And so when you come in and you're 30-40% on your ask higher, which I see often, specifically for brand new, haven't had the career path yet, it's a disqualifier.
Mm.
Because here's the thing is,
Wow.
the role that I play, and really the way I advise a hiring manager or an owner, we're not going to go back and negotiate down that request. If someone feels that that's their value, and it may be from a salary standpoint, that might be their salary value, more power to that person. Keep on that path to find exactly what you're looking for if that's the most important driver for you. But we're not going to take time to educate somebody and go back. I'll tell someone, hey, you're outside of budget. Someone that is going through that process, by the way, asking what budget is a great question. I know for a lot of what I do, it's completely appropriate. Recruiters are going to dance. Hiring managers might be a little bit uncomfortable with it too. Oftentimes I have a budget range, but because of the way the market's been, oftentimes I know that, and the owners know, the hiring managers know that the budget range might not apply. So
Mm-hmm.
budget's budget. You got to stay within reason. But when we're interviewing a handful of people and we're asking salary expectations as an example, if we find out that everybody that's qualified candidate is above budget, then there's probably something wrong with our budget,
Yeah.
right? So asking what the budget range is appropriate, but that's a disqualifier. Top 3 things though,